In a silent courtroom filled with tension, a judge prepared for what seemed like just another trial. But when the defendant lifted his head, the judge's heart nearly stopped. This wasn't just any man. It was his childhood friend, someone he hadn't seen in decades. What followed was a battle between law and conscience, between justice and prejudice. And when the verdict was finally read, it left everyone in shock. Stay with this story until the very end, because what happens inside that courtroom will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice, friendship, and the power of second chances. The courthouse stood tall, its marble columns weathered by time, symbolizing justice yet hiding centuries of stories where justice had not always prevailed. Inside, the air was heavy, charged with anticipation. Every seat was filled, the murmurs of the crowd blending into a low hum that echoed against the polished wooden walls. For many in the room, it was just another trial, another defendant standing against the full weight of the system. But for Judge Henry Walters, this day carried an unexpected tension that he could not yet explain. As he adjusted his glasses and scanned the courtroom, his gaze fell on the defendant brought in by two officers. The man's posture was weary, his clothes worn, and his eyes, dark and restless, spoke of battles fought long before this trial even began. Something about him stirred a faint recognition in the judge's memory, but the formality of the proceedings kept Henry composed. After all, a courtroom was no place for distraction. The charges were serious: burglary, trespassing, and intent to steal. The community had already whispered its judgment before the evidence was even presented, and the defendant's skin color played no small role in that silent verdict. Henry had presided over many such cases, but this one seemed different. There was a tug in his chest, a distant echo of familiarity, as though fate had brought someone from his past to stand before him. He could not have imagined just how personal this trial was about to become. When the defendant raised his head to face the court, Henry froze. The man's sharp cheekbones, the set of his jaw, and the faint scar running across his eyebrow struck the judge with a jolt of recognition. Memories flooded back. Two boys running barefoot through grassy fields, sharing sandwiches at school, whispering dreams of who they might become. This was Michael Carter, Henry's childhood friend. But the man before him now was a shadow of that boyhood companion. The sparkle of mischief in his eyes had been replaced by exhaustion and defeat. The weight of poverty and prejudice had carved deep lines into his face. Where Henry had taken a path paved with privilege, opportunities, and education, Michael's road had been far harsher. The judge felt his heart twist as he realized what had become of his old friend. How long had it been since they had last spoken? 20, maybe 30 years? The court saw only another black man accused of crime, but Henry saw a fragment of his own past standing accused. He quickly masked his emotions behind the stern expression expected of him. A judge could not allow personal history to cloud the law. Yet deep inside, Henry knew this trial would test not only his duty, but his conscience. Because he couldn't stop asking himself, had the system failed Michael? Or had Henry, by his silence and absence, been part of that failure too? The prosecution wasted no time painting a grim picture. They presented grainy security footage, witness statements, and a narrative that seemed airtight. According to their story, Michael had broken into a local store after hours, attempting to steal supplies. But as Henry listened carefully, details didn't align. The footage was blurred, the witness accounts contradictory. It felt less like proof and more like an effort to frame a story that everyone in the room already wanted to believe. Michael sat quietly, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. To the jury, silence might appear as guilt, but Henry recognized it differently. It was the silence of someone too tired to keep fighting a system that had never given him a fair chance. The defense attorney, overworked and underpaid, struggled to challenge the prosecution's narrative. Each objection was brushed aside, each argument drowned beneath the mountain of assumptions already stacked against Michael. Henry's mind drifted back to the boy he once knew, the boy who loved books, who had dreams of becoming a teacher, who once shared with him the hope of leaving their small town to make a difference. Now that boy sat shackled, accused of a crime that might strip away the last shred of his dignity. Henry felt the eyes of the courtroom on him, waiting for his rulings, his instructions, his authority. But inside, the weight of friendship and justice battled silently, forcing him to question not only the evidence but the very system he represented. As the trial continued, Henry's thoughts wandered to their shared childhood. He remembered summer afternoons when he and Michael would play baseball until the sun dipped below the horizon. They were inseparable then, unaware of the invisible lines society had already drawn around them. But those lines grew clearer as they aged. Henry's family was well off, their influence in the community smoothing his way into good schools, scholarships, and eventually law school. Michael's family, however, struggled daily. His mother cleaned houses, his father worked double shifts at the factory, yet it was never enough. The town's quiet but constant racism weighed heavily on them, denying Michael opportunities no matter how hard he tried. Henry thought about the day they drifted apart. While Henry was accepted into an elite preparatory school, Michael was left behind in a public school plagued by underfunding and neglect. That was the last time they saw each other as equals. After that, their worlds no longer intersected. And now, decades later, their paths had crossed again, not as friends on equal ground, but as judge and defendant. The realization hit Henry like a stone. While he had climbed the ladder of privilege, Michael had been pushed further down by the weight of systemic injustice. The courtroom buzzed with voices, but Henry barely heard them. He could only wonder, if life had dealt the cards differently, could their roles have been reversed? Could he, instead, have been the one in shackles today? The defense rested its case, and for a brief moment, the courtroom grew silent. Michael lifted his head and looked directly at Henry. Their eyes met, and in that unspoken connection, Henry felt the echo of a plea. Not for mercy, not even for freedom, but for recognition. Michael wanted to be seen, not as another defendant, not as a stereotype, but as a human being. Someone who had once dreamed, laughed, and belonged. Henry could almost hear the voice of that boyhood friend, asking silently, "Do you remember me? Do you remember who I was, before the world decided who I could be?" The judge's heart tightened. He had sworn to uphold the law, but here was a man whose very existence revealed how unevenly that law was applied. Every ruling he made, every instruction he gave, could tip the balance. He could not erase the years that had led Michael here, but he could ensure this trial was not another act of injustice written into his life story. And so, Henry leaned forward, carefully considering each word as he prepared to address the jury. He would not tell them who Michael once was. He could not reveal the friendship they shared. But he could remind them of a truth deeper than evidence, that justice was not about assumptions, but about fairness, humanity, and conscience. It was a gamble, but one Henry felt compelled to take. The jury deliberated for hours that stretched into eternity. The courtroom was hushed, tension tightening around every whispered breath. Michael sat still, his gaze steady, as though bracing himself for the inevitable. Henry's hands trembled beneath the bench where no one could see. Finally, the jury filed back in. The foreman's voice rang clear, cutting through the silence. "Not guilty." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some faces registered relief, others outrage. The prosecution looked stunned, already planning an appeal in their minds. But Michael, he simply closed his eyes, as though savoring the first true breath of freedom he had felt in years. Henry remained composed, striking his gavel to restore order, but inside his heart swelled with emotion. For once, the system had bent toward fairness. It did not erase the decades of injustice, nor did it change the scars Michael carried. But in this moment, The truth had broken through the prejudice. As the courtroom emptied, Michael glanced back one final time, his eyes locking with Henry's. It was not a look of gratitude alone, but of acknowledgement. They were no longer boys on the same playground, but in that shared glance, the years melted away, and Henry knew Michael remembered too. When the courtroom finally cleared, Henry remained seated, staring at the empty bench before him. His robe, once a symbol of authority, felt heavy on his shoulders. He had presided over countless trials, but none had pierced him like this one. Michael was free, for now. But how many others like him sat in cells, their lives reduced to files and case numbers, never given the benefit of fairness? How many more childhood friends might he have unknowingly abandoned to the hands of a system that weighed skin color more than truth? Henry thought about the boy who once dreamed of becoming a teacher. He wondered if that boy could ever reclaim the pieces of himself that life had stolen. And he wondered too about his own role in a society that allowed such disparities to exist unchecked. As he left the courtroom, the marble pillars seemed less like monuments of justice and more like silent witnesses to centuries of unequal trials. Henry realized that justice was not about verdicts alone. It was about confronting the uncomfortable truths that lived beneath them. The echo of Michael's eyes stayed with him, a reminder that behind every case, every defendant, there was a human story waiting to be seen. And so the question lingered, heavy in his heart, and perhaps in the hearts of all who had witnessed the trial. If justice depends on who is watching, was it ever truly justice at all?